The former speakers have the pointer.
Okay, I just need to make, my name is Christian Zimmerman. I'm from the Prospect Park Alliance, and I want to make one slight correction. Having Prospect Park being in Brooklyn, considered the hippest borough, and also home of Jay-Z, we tend to talk about Brooklyn as being the city and Manhattan being part of the outer boroughs. So I'm really happy to be in one of the outer boroughs. It's been a while since I've crossed the river. So thank you for letting me talk about Prospect Park and our restoration efforts in our woodlands. Just a quick, brief background. This is Prospect Park. It's 526 acres, which is this part. You will probably see on our website where we talk about 585 acres, trying to be imperialistic and take over. That's Grand Army Plaza and also the parade ground. They are separate properties. But so all in all, it's 585 acres, but the park itself is 526. Here's the institutions. You have the Brooklyn Public Library, the Botanic Garden here, and the Brooklyn Museum. I think what's interesting about this image as well is it shows kind of the central part of the Olmsted design for Brooklyn when it comes to the park system. This is Eastern Parkway here, and then over at this end, which you just can't quite see, is Ocean Parkway. So he was creating this core large urban park. In addition to that, then he was creating this web that was trying to connect all these other parks. So it was always connected by green space. So you had Carroll Park, Fort Greene Park, and a number of other parks. So he had created that at the same time when he was designing Prospect Park. The park essentially has three kinds of elements. It's the woods, the water, and the meadow. And you're probably going to see a lot of similarities of what I'm talking about as in Central Park. They were the same designers for both properties. But we have the large meadow, and we have a large 60-acre lake. But what they also did is they created this core woodland. It was 150 acres, and then there's a perimeter edge, which is about 100 acres. So about half the park is woodland or forest, we'd like to say. And in creating this park, Olmsted and Vox, what they were talking about doing was creating two things. One is a scenery, an environment that was unencumbered by the human element. So it was really natural, but it was scenery in the sense of creating nature as an aesthetic. And then they were also trying to create this place that was separate actually from the city, but also a place where people could come and enjoy themselves and relax. And one of the quotes that they used in the 1866 report to us had to say that was really interesting is they wanted to create an opportunity for people to come together for the single purpose of enjoyment, unembarrassed by the limitations with which they are surrounded at home or in the daily avocations or of such amusements as are seen elsewhere offered. It was really the small d democratic environment. All people should come to Prospect Park. Now, the property wasn't the most exciting. It was different than Central Park in the sense that we didn't have our bedrock. Our bedrock, I think, is about 250 feet below the surface, so it is on the terminal moraine. There was a forest, remnant forest. It was working woods, so it probably had been clear-cut a number of times, but there was a forest there. And there was the outwash plain on the one side, and then the terminal moraine on the Manhattan side. So you can see early on as they're constructing it, it's pretty, not so pretty. There's the woods across the meadow. So what they were trying to create was they were trying to create this scenery that the public could come in and enjoy. But there was a tension because by creating the scenery and inviting the people, the scenery was for you to look at, but they also wanted you to partake in it. And there was this tension, which, as you heard earlier, and it's constant for us today, of how do you bring people in but not destroy it? How do you get them to enjoy it and really use it and have it as a recuperative effect on their personal well-being, but not have them ruin it? This is their early woods. And if you look closely, there really isn't a huge understory. Very thick. It's pretty much... They also were really into this tropical effect. So Olmsted was a plantsman. He wanted, it wasn't all about native material at all. It was what kind of effect, what kind of tropical quality can we create in this environment. So this is actually a great view of standing in one of our gorge areas, the Ambriel, and if you look closely, you see a couple people standing on this bridge. That's our headwaters. Just to remind everybody, the water system for the park is fake. It is a gravity-fed system. It fills in, it's city water. We do use the well. We have a well that taps into the Brooklyn Aquifer when we have droughts. But it is, we turn a pipe, turn a valve, and you can smell chlorine or the nice city water right at this point. But it was all meant to look natural. There's one of our bridle paths bringing you into the park, being a part of the nature, part of the woodlands. So early on, there was heavy use. Actually, more people back in the 1870s used the park. We have records where right now we're considering about 9 million visits a year. There were times where they said 12 million visits. But the park deteriorated, and they were constantly rebuilding it. And in the 60s and 70s, the decline was most dramatic. You see strong desire lines, no understory. Our stream had been sedimented in completely. Our water features, a couple pools had been filled in completely. We had phragmites and just sediment. This is in our ravine area, so this is ravine stream. The bridle path is here. We're pedestrian path in the stream. So it's just eroded, decayed. And this is, just to give you a sense, this is 1998. This is not that long ago. It was a dangerous place to be. People didn't want to come into the middle of the park. The banks of the ponds were really eroded. Just a side note, that's my office right there in the picnic house. And once again, we had these grasses, but they were not native grasses and no understory. So there was this fear, there often is talked about back in the 60s and 70s, that the Parks Department would clear the underbrush and clear the shrubs to protect the people from crime, because someone would be lurking behind a shrub. And then, in addition to that, there were these structures that were just left abandoned within the woods, along the water course, and you see these remnants. And this is a concrete weir that there used to be a separation of the two pools by rockwork. But in the 50s, they decided they needed to make it more engineered, I guess. So they did this, but then they left it in place as it no longer functioned and sedimented in. So this is also not a shout out to Andropogon Associates, but yes, again, we worked with them as well. They were clearly on the cutting edge of woodland restoration in the 90s. But they worked with Ed Toth, the Director of Landscape Management in the park. I hope I'll do him justice today. As we were getting into the restoration of the park and restoring the woods, Ed proposed a radical change in how we work in a historic park in our woodland restoration. The plans before this, in the late 80s, early 90s, had to do with this kind of restoration work. This is an early shot of the original design when they implemented. You'll see a lot of evergreens. This is that same bridle path on this one side that you've seen twice, and the pedestrian path in the stream corridor that was totally eroded. Edward was saying, and he pitched it to Tupper Thomas, who was the administrator at the time, that we need to come up with an ecosystem approach to saving our woodlands. They were dying, and just planting horticultural species will not do it. So he proposed, in a very radical way, and she agreed to it, is that not only when we reforest our woods, our 150-acre core, that we would do it with seed-collected material collected within a 60-mile radius of Prospect Park. We worked at locating the sources, and at the time when we were doing this, there weren't really many nurseries out there that were growing native plants. So we contract grew all the native material. The one concession that happened when it came to the original design that we had this tension over, because we're balancing this native plant and this urban park, historic park, with the native woodlands, is that when it came to the aesthetic features, the really strong water course, we would plant horticulturally traditional nursery grown material so we could create larger kind of instant effects. So just keep an eye on this guy. We used a number of trees as markers just because in restoring the woods, we needed to do it in two ways. One, we needed to do it capitally because the infrastructure was in such bad shape. We had to rebuild the drainage system, the water course, the paths, the bridle paths, all of the structures. And then secondly, we had a natural resources crew like Central Park, and they would work a lot in the woods, and they would do small incremental areas. So we would work hand in hand. But the desire was, and the need was, to first stabilize the infrastructure. And often what we talk about in the park as well is the park was neglected to such a point that things weren't so much wasn't removed, it was buried in sediment. So this whole water course along here was really just uncovered. So if you look, so this tree, and you can just see all the sediment, is this tree. So we just dug down and recreated this. So we kind of have a do no harm approach when it comes to our restoration. If we see a bridge or if we see a waterfall, we clean it up, we assess, is it in good shape? Can we just leave it alone? Because it's part of the original design, and then we do that if we can, and then we added all of the boulders along the edge, stabilized that area, and then planted it. Another very dramatic area is our Ambergill Cascade. So this is the tightest, most constricted point of our watercourse system. It's about a mile in length. It drops about 75 feet from beginning to end. So if you're familiar with the boathouse, so if you go to where our ball fields are, and the upper falls in the Fallkill, it's about a 75-foot drop from there, and it's about a mile. This is what an original early shot of that was, and this is what it was like when we started construction in 1998. So to go back, this rock, it's this rock. So you can just see the waterfall didn't exist. There was 8.5 feet of sediment in this area. The hillside all just collapsed. And because, in part of our restoration efforts, we don't have any of the detailed drawings. We have big plans, but for whatever reason, Prospect Park we were never able to find the original designs or details. We have the large plans, and we have the annual reports, and we have the letters. But actually, how they built this, what their design, any of the details, they weren't there. So we had to actually analyze the photographs, look at this, try and figure out where this was, and depth, understanding this distance. So that's a bunch of us. We were very unproductive at the beginning stages. Anytime anyone found anything, we'd all run down, look for it. Like, the reason we all stopped today is we thought at this point was the waterfall, because we had no idea what this perspective, this distance was. And somebody found, I think Peter Eckert, who was the landscape architect working on this at the time, he found a structure here. We dug it all up. I'm standing there trying to figure out the height. Everyone's just kind of looking around. But we found out that wasn't the spot. But we eventually found what we thought was the correct location. So here we're building this moonscape, this rocky, really artificial, meant to look natural, gorge area. Oh, just to step back. Because it's a gravity system and it's all interconnected, we couldn't ever turn it off because if we turned off the water, we would dry up the lake, because this all fed the lake. So what we wound up doing is creating these bypasses. So every time, we started at the headwaters of the water course, and we'd work our way down. So every time we'd do a section of the restoration, we'd have to figure out a way to divert the water, allowing us to do all the work in the dry condition. That's once all the boulders were put in place but not planted. So we had to create this elaborate planting pocket scheme. And that's what it was when we were, this is about 2 years after. So, historic, before, after, boulders, boulders, just to give you a sense. So from top to bottom, it's about 19 feet. What you'll also notice here, in the watercourse restoration, we weren't holding it so purist, because if you look at the angle of this and the angle of this waterfall, this is very narrow and it's pointed into this side. When we hired some engineers to look at the hydrology and the impact, they had done a computer model and they had figured out that in a 10-year storm, in this little space, because it was about 4 feet, they figured, a 4-foot wall of water would come crashing over. And they figured if we just opened it up slightly, made it 2 feet wider, a 10-year storm, we could get a 2-foot wall of water coming over, but it would also not hit the side. So that's saved us tremendously. And that's, we surmise that's why this area failed through time, through the sediment, and then it just probably washed away. You can see here in our slopes, without any understory, we had to rebuild it completely. And I think in these projects, we probably installed well over 100,000 square feet of erosion control fabric just to stabilize, bring back, and we put crib logs below and above. And this is the heavy-duty stuff. This is not the core or the jute mesh. This would be the core mesh. But one of the things that we learned that was kind of interesting with our contractors is they learned there's these little saws called Makitas. It's a brand name, but it has a little tiny saw blade, circular. They use it a lot for cutting mortar joints in walls. Well, what's really great is it's great to cut into the mesh without having it erode away. So they'd have guys just jumping up and down on the hillside, just zipping along, and the other one planting all the seedlings, the herbaceous and the understory plantings. So we planted well over, sorry, I need my glasses for this. Just to give you a sense of the quantities, 215,000 herbaceous plants, 14,000 trees, 15,000 shrubs. Just to stabilize, I guess in this area it was probably about, because it's right along the water course, probably about 5 acres. So it's very densely planted in there, and then the trees were interspersed over an area about 35 acres. There's another little shot. And then soon after, one of the most difficult things in doing this is trying to take a picture of the woods forest. It's just difficult to take a photograph of and have it make any kind of sense. But we started to get an understory again. So that brings up fences. When we worked on this project, these projects, there were a series of projects, we purposely designed into it and installed temporary fencing. The temporary fencing, it's not in concrete, they're driven in, but what we realized is that we needed to do something to protect the woods from the public. At least during the first 10-year period, we're guessing, as we're restoring this woodland area, saying that it'll take about 10 years for the seedlings, because most of the trees were about 2 feet tall, to get established. That was just a guess. We had to use something at the time. But in doing so, it's allowed us to protect the understory and undergrowth in all these areas. Our long-term goal in this case is to revisit the whole fence situation and in time take pieces down we hope, or move them around. But what we found out also with the whole fencing is that the bird watchers actually do like it. We're allowing the dog walkers. We have a huge dog walking population, if you know Prospect Park at all. And it's on leash when it comes to the woods area, but by putting the fences in, and as long as they're 3.5 feet high, the public generally wasn't too angry about it. There were some groups that were unhappy, but it allowed them to take pictures, it allowed them to access through the woods, but not trample. This is the upper pool. We also put in a whole layer of aquatic plant material. And what we've found in this approach is that we've had a huge increase in wildlife. We get over 200 species of birds that come through the park now. Many more of them now stay in the summer and nest. It's not always the Canada geese that stay. There's others. And also, there's a bigger population of chipmunks and also mammals. So that's been really kind of a good thing for us in our eyes. Challenges. Charles had the BMX guys. You got a picture. I didn't know where you get that picture, but they are amazing. These are hipsters, 20-something guys that are taking nature and creating a bicycle course, a BMX raceway, and it's in more of our remote areas, and it's absolutely amazing. These are our current challenges. So we've restored the area, but they come in and they take over these other areas. This is a 180 that they banked, and it's all natural. They took the wood, the mud, the stone, anything they could, and they do that. We are still getting desire lines. We are also, this is that waterfall. So you can see the area that's inaccessible to the public is doing much better than the area that they climb around and do that. So we have a fence off to the side. They climb the fence. They really want to get to these areas. I mean, one of the things that Olmsted and Vox did so well was create attractive places for people to want to go, even if they're not supposed to go there. People love sitting here. One of the side problems that we didn't understand is the soils in Prospect Park are very loose and they fall dramatically. This area actually has been planted we're going on our 4th time in planting, and it just keeps slumping. We have a problem in the sense that there's an original path up here and an original path here, and we can't change much unless we really bring up this rock wall. So we keep replanting it, but the soils keep sloughing. We can't get the roots to grow quickly enough. So I know we're talking about Central Park, but if anyone can solve this problem for me, I would really appreciate it. Storm damage. Chris Nolan spoke about that. We were hit with a snowstorm and then a tornado and then a hurricane. We didn't lose 500 trees, but it destroyed so much of what we had in the park, and we were not prepared for it. You don't put in your plan, I mean, we didn't have a FEMA approach in our woodlands. What do we do with things like that? So we're all now trying to figure it out. If you're in a big woodland or a native forest somewhere and there's a storm and the tree falls and we let it rot, well, we clearly can't do that here. But it does open up all the challenges of invasives coming in. Something taking over. We are also sometimes our worst enemies. So this looks really beautiful as this whole native forest keeps growing and doing well. This is looking from the Nethermead Arch. It actually is this. So you're supposed to see the water course. There's the bridle path, and there's the bridle path. There's the bridle path. There's the bridle path. So sometime our successes in native woodland restoration have gone too far. So in discussing with our landscape management crew, we're now going back to the important view sheds, the view corridors, what Olmsted and Vox wanted. So this is actually, this is like 2000, and this is 2 weeks ago. So you can see, but with so much to work on and so much to maintain, sometimes those things don't happen. But this is high on our list for this next year. We are getting a great stand of birch trees. All of this area is behind a fence. We still get homeless people coming in, we still get camps, but it's much reduced. We've restored the water in these areas, so we have these ponds. We also do place trees over the water so the birds can sit there and hunt. That actually was set in place. And then there's our beginning of the water course. So what we're noticing, I guess, from our takeaway in this is that we will never restore Prospect Park woods. We don't think it's ever possible. It's so fragmented by the path systems that it is really considered, it's 150 acres of core woods, but it really is all woodland edge. There are so many paths, and we have invasives coming in all the time. But what's important to us is that we don't just throw up our hands and give up. We continue to do the restoration, but we'll have to continue to work on it. But by doing so, you still get the beautiful aesthetics for the public that Olmsted and Box wanted, and you're also getting the wildlife back. That's so important. There's so little land in the New York City area where the birds can migrate and rest on. So we're still continuing, but it's a